Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here, and welcome to my review of the Flipears Aether. So Flipears happens to be a brand out of the Philippines, and I was in Manila recently, and that's where I picked up this Flipears IM along with the Artha. And honestly, guys, I've been so impressed. So, guys, these are amazing IMs that most of you have not yet come across. You will come across Flipears because they have been attending Can Jams. And the recent Can Jams, they have been well received. They went to SoCal, if I'm not mistaken, in 2023. And in 2024, if you are going to make it out to Singapore, do check them out because they are outstanding. So I went in not knowing what to expect but I have to say that, I had a lot of confidence in a lot of the Southeast Asian brands because a lot of the best IMs on the planet these days are coming out of Southeast Asia. Whether it is the Nightjar Acoustics guys or the Symphonium guys, or the Subtonic guys, or even the Malaysian brand Elysian Acoustics, which has now been invested into by Effect Audio, if I'm not mistaken. So, guys, I went in hoping that these would be great, and they turned out to be better than my expectations because these are outstanding for $700. That's a TLDR. I'll break down this review into specs, a discussion of sources I used, packaging, build quality, and then tonality, and of course, then finally I'll end with a discussion on technicality, and I'll drop some comparisons to the variations to the Audio Monarch, the i600, the Sony IR-M9, etc. But I just want you to know, guys, I'll also drop a link to the frequency response of this IM. I just want you to know that, just because it's a brand that you have not heard of, you should still not write it off because, these are guys who've had experience of over 11 years making IM for pro audio. So, they're not exactly a new kid on the block, if you know what I mean. In terms of, the specs and all that good stuff that often in the past I used to sort of be remiss in talking about, but I've realized over time that a lot of you guys, a lot of the audience likes to hear about specs and stuff. So these have a 4BA driver configuration. So you have one for the sort of low bass, one for low mids, one for upper mids, and one for high. It's a 4-way crossover system with the bass switch. The bass switch does actually make an enormous difference to the sound. So that's that. It has a sensitivity of 109 dB, a frequency response of 5 Hz to 20 kHz, and a price of $700, like I said. Sources I use include the Sony W1ZM2, which of course is a very, very impressive source device. And I live by the Sony and I die by the Sony. And I'm not dead, of course, but it is an extraordinary device, and I love it, and I recommend it highly, and I don't think even owners of the Sony W1ZM2 realize how good it is. And I know this because I've tried everything else on the market, and nothing in its form factor have made me choose anything else over the Sony, so that's that. But this is not a review of the Sony, of course. I've also used the Sony DMP-Z1, which is the gargantuan flagship magnum opus from Sony, which I think is slightly better in performance than the W1ZM2, and the only thing worth upgrading to from this W1ZM2. And I've also used, Bluetooth dongles like the FiO BTR7. So I have used it with a variety of sources. It does come with nice packaging. It does have this very lovely leather sort of carrying case. It's actually original leather, so that's worth keeping in mind. It's not some faux leather stuff, which you often get with IMs at this price range. It's got this very precise stitching here. It shuts nicely. It opens up. You get this cleaning cloth that's branded. I got a t-shirt with this, but I don't know. Maybe that was because I was one of the first buyers of this. You also get, these a selection of tips, which I don't want to take out because this was a bit difficult for me to put back in. Stickers, some paperwork, and this cleaning tool. So it's a nice setup, and it's a pretty standard, handsome-looking carrying case. Okay, so the build quality is impeccable. And I know this because I've talked at length to these guys about build quality. They do go overboard with build quality, and the aesthetics are also strikingly beautiful, I think. So these colorways are reflective, and they will look different in different lighting conditions, so that's worth keeping in mind. It's not too blingy. It's, as a matter of fact, somewhat subtle, to the point that this star that you see, the 6-sided star, is not, it's not very evident unless you see it in proper lighting conditions, or the lettering Aether here, which I think is a nice, subtle take. And it also has some ornamentation on the inside of the shells, which is a unique take. And I've never seen IMs like this other than this IM and the Flipears Artha, which is their, more expensive one at $1,700, which I will be reviewing later. So in any case, these are very good looking, strikingly good looking, as a matter of fact. Okay, now looks aside, how do they sound? So before we get into a discussion of the tonal frequency response and all that, I just want to take you through some of the songs that I've played today. So I started with Show Me How to Live from Audioslave, and that was really nicely done because I feel like Chris Cornell has this powerful voice that sounds almost depressing, melancholic, and yet very emotional and soulful. So this was able to keep up with Chris Cornell's sort of, inflections in his voice, the nuances in his delivery, the raspiness in his voice, the chestiness in his voice, the anguish in his voice. All that was very well captured. So these are definitively some mid-range masters. I would say these are better than any Dunu IM that I've heard. And also better than any Moondrop IMs that I've heard, because Moondrop IMs tend to have more upper mid shout than I think this does. So I'll talk about the frequency response in a bit, but in general, this does not have the same level of shoutiness that the Moondrop IMs do that are more harmon tuned, but yet this is not entirely anti-harmon, if you know what I mean. This just has a little more bass shelf, I think, a little more treble presence. So beyond that comparison and beyond this track, I played Numa from Tool. And when playing Tool, what was amazing about this IM, that even at this price point, imaging was very, very distinct. And you definitely got a sense of images panning around the stage. You got a sense of very distinct placements of images, like drum hits coming from different directions. So you could make out individual drums on this. So very impressive technically for that. I also played Land of Sunshine by Faith No More. I played One in a Million from Aaliyah, and that song had very good sub bass. So the sub bass rumble was very, very rumbly. It was very deep. It was very deep reaching. It was impressive. It was guttural. So the sub bass here does not sound like the sub bass on any other but a BA bass IM. And I know this is something that's often used and perhaps misused, because people have said this about the bass, the BA bass of the Subtonic Storm, for the Multiverse Mentor, for the U12T, for the Anole VX, for the Symphonium Helios as well. So I have the Helios here, and I do think that the Helios does have extremely good bass, great bass texture and decay, and does, I think, outperform many dynamic drivers for bass. So Symphonium Helios was the first IM that sort of restored my faith in BA based IMs, especially with the Sony W and ZM2. There's something that happens with the Sony DAP that makes BA bass sound less BA-like. It just adds a little more decay, a little more note linger texture to the bass of BA bass IMs, making BA bass IMs sound more dynamic driver-like. So this was sort of like, one of the best renditions of BA bass that I've heard, surpassing the U12T, the Anole VX easily. And I would even say, in terms of its realism and ability to sound like dynamic driver bass, I think this was on the same level as a Subtonic Storm or a Multiverse Mentor. Now, this is, I would say, at the same level in terms of BA bass performance, because it sounds very tactile. It does have decay, and it doesn't sound like BA bass, guys. Like, I've played this for a lot of people who did not know his driver configuration, and they thought this was dynamic driver bass. So, I mean, it's not exactly as hard and tactile as a lot of dynamic drivers like you might get from Empire Ears or Sony Z1R or the Fur Audio stuff, but it is much better than a lot of other dynamic driver based IMs, which might not have the best quality of dynamic driver. So that's what it is. The bass response is fantastic. It does have some mid bass, so it does have a bit of warmth leading into the mids. The mids are pretty linear up until the upper mids. Upper mids have pinna gain, sufficient pinna gain. I would say it's a little more present, the upper mid pinna gain, than on the Helios, but it's not as extended as on the Moondrop variation. So it doesn't have any shoutiness going on, which makes it very, very easy to listen to for a long time. Like, I've listened to this over at the course of a 4-hour flight, and this was just phenomenal during the flight, because it played back every track well. It's almost a very safe tuning without being too safe and boring, because it does have some treble frequency energy. Like, there's a peak around 8 kilohertz, which I think is important, which reminds me of the Susvara peak, because it doesn't sound bright on its own, but it adds a little bit of sizzle to cymbals, a little bit of clarity to the notes. And there's a bit of energy around 12 kilohertz, which I think is also very important, because that lends this sort of airiness and breathiness to vocals, and this sort of, splash around cymbals and space around instruments, which makes everything become more lifelike. So for that alone, I think this deserves a lot of plaudits and kudos, because it does do the frequency response really, really well. Okay, this treble is the complete opposite of the usual gritty, plasticky sort of treble you get with a lot of these, piezo-based IMs out there. And so I really recommend this treble very highly, because it's a really nicely done treble. It does exist. So it's not dark like Harman tuned IMs can be. It's not rolled off like Harman tuned IMs can be. But it is a very, very interesting IM. So the fact that these guys have been tuning IMs for musicians for as long as they have, which I think is around 12 years, it does show because they have an amazing ability to tune, guys. That's pretty evident for me. Now, in terms of technicalities, I think it's very impressive. I mean, it's not at the same level as something like a Helios, which I think is just outstanding for technicalities. Helios does come in at a higher price point. It is $700. It's $400 more expensive. The Helios is currently priced at $1,100, which I think is a great price because the Helios is aggressively priced at $1,100. The Helios is outstanding at $1,100. The Helios does, I think, outperform the U12T. To me, the Helios outperforms many IMs into a $2,000 price range. It outperforms an only VX to me. The Helios is outstanding. So this is like the gold standard for a $1,000 IM. And I would say this is a gold standard for a $700 IM because it does not out-resolve the Helios, but it does out-resolve and outperform technically the variations, the i600, the Sony IR M9. I have been long biased towards Sennheiser and Sony stuff, but I would say this outperformed the Sennheiser and Sony stuff because i900, the middle child of the Sennheiser family, this was an instant hit. The i600, the 900 I do think is a better IM than this. The i900 is of course more expensive than the $700 IM. But the i600, on the other hand, is a better match for this because they're of a similar price point. i600 again is similar to the i900 but has more pinna gain, which I think some people liked. The i600 is a very good IM for the price. I reviewed it on my channel. It's extremely comfortable and is a fun V-shaped tuning with some added emphasis on the treble. The Aether is, like I said, similarly priced, but I do think I find it to be noticeably warmer, a more neutral and more studio monitor-esque sort of tuning. So I would say this is a better all-rounder with a weightier mid-range and a smoother treble. And I do think overall this is a better IM than i600. In terms of its comparison to the Sony IR M9, another IM that I've loved and I've reviewed on this channel way, way, way back. I'm a bit of a Sony fanboy, but the M9 is an amazing IM, 5 years old and still very relevant. However, I want to say that the M9 has a bit of a softness to the bass, which I think the Aether is able to avoid. The BA bass on the Aether, I think, is superior to the BA bass on the Sony IR M9, and I don't say that lightly because the M9 bass is pretty impressive. And the treble region, I think, for the M9 can be harsh sometimes. It's very tip sensitive, but this is more smooth. This is very smooth, and even with the treble switches on or off, you get a pretty smooth rendition of treble, so that's that. And I think it's less boring than the M9, if you know what I mean. And finally, with regard to the Moondrop variations, guys, I don't really like the variations. I think it's classical. It sort of depicts all the classic flaws with Harman, which is a bone-dry mid-range, a bass that's more skewed towards sub-bass than mid-bass, which becomes boring after a while. So the Harman tuning will impress at first blush because you get all this detail shoved in your face because of the very pointy pinna gain. You get this impressive sub-bass rendition which sounds very impactful on first blush, but then over time you bore of it or tire of it because it's a very sub-bass heavy tuning becomes boring. This is, I think, an improvement over the Variations tuning. I mean, technically they're pretty similar because the Variations is an outstandingly technical IM for its price point. There's better soundstage here, of course, because Harman tuned IMs can be very narrow in soundstage. This has a slightly wider soundstage. But overall, I would take this to the Variations any day because it's just a little more impressive in its tonality. It's a bit more of an all-rounder. It has mid-bass without adding any bloat. It has air frequencies without sounding shrill. It has a pinna gain without being shouty. So it is a masterfully tuned IM. And with the tuning switches, it does elevate the bass. So you get 5 to 8 dB more bass, which does work because you get this enormous bass response without, again, clouding up the mid. So, guys, I mean, I'm going to do more reviews of this in the future. This is just, first impressions of the Aether. And it is a standout IM. I know I can't praise it too much because most of you have not heard it, but I would honestly encourage you to check this out. If you run into Flipears, if you're able to get on some sort of review tour, get in touch with them. Or if you're able to audition them at any of the upcoming Can Jams, do stop by to these guys and say hi. I mean, they're amazing to deal with. They sound super friendly. They are intelligent, they're smart guys who are hobbyists. And yeah, say hi to them, check out their stuff, because I do think more and more of you will be talking about these IMs in the not too distant future. So with that, guys, that's it. This is a first impressions video, and I will be dropping further impressions on Flipears stuff, because honestly, I'm very impressed. Thank you for watching this video, and if you like this video, give this a like. Follow my channel if you have not yet followed my work, followed my channel, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye-bye.